Have you ever wanted to recreate the early tones of the Beatles for next to nothing? Well, stay tuned, because with a little help from me, you'll be there in no time. This is Beatles on a Budget. Imagine this, the year 1963. You're in Britain, the music of the time, rock and roll, and the band on top, the Beatles, characterised by sharp lead tones, jangly rhythm sections, thumping bass, and a great backbeat. In today's episode, the first episode of Beatles on a Budget, I'm going to be showing you how to get that crisp Harrison lead tone, I'm going to be showing you how to get that thumping McCartney bass tone, and I'm also going to unveil how the Beatles got such great vocals on those early tracks. For next to nothing. Stay tuned, this is Beatles on a Budget. Harrison's lead tone, what do we know about it? Well, in this era he primarily used a dual jet or a country gentleman, Gretsch. However, they cost a fair amount of money, and for what we're trying to do here, we don't have the money for that, so we're going to use basically any hollow body we can find with a pair of humbuckers in them, because that will get us as close to the tone as we can possibly get. It still probably would work with something like a Strat. However, you probably need to look at the strings you're using on the guitar, as well as what pickups and positions that you're using. You might also just need to boost certain parts of the EQ if you use single coils, purely just to get that warmth and that thickness that comes with humbuckers. So the guitar I'm going to be using is a Heartwood Revival semi-hollow body guitar. These go for maybe around £150. Again, you can use stuff cheaper, but this is quite cheap compared to the thousands of pounds that a Gretsch Country Gentleman or a dual jet would run you. I'm going to be using heavy gauge strings, about anywhere from 11 to 13, flat wounds, because they're a bit more snappy. They have that rounded 60s sound while still letting through that crisp sound of that guitar. I'm not going to be using any amps for this. I do have a small Vox amp that does get quite close to the tone, but again, we're doing this on a budget, so we're just going to plug it straight into the audio interface, and I will show you my EQ, my compression, the reverb, the lot. This is how I got as close as I possibly could to George Harrison's lead tone. So in order to get that crisp lead 63 Harrison guitar tone, for example, like the one used on All My Loving, what I did first was downloaded NAM, which is the Neuro Amp Modeler, which allows you to take IRs and examples of recorded amps and cabs from other people that have already put their stuff online for you to use. So what I've used is a replica of a Vox pedal, which is similar to what the Beatles would have been using. They would have used a Vox AC30 at the time, however they go for quite a bit, and we're doing this on a budget, so this software is free, just as the downloads are free. So I've got about 2.6 dB on input, I've got about 3, I've got my bass at about 3, I've got my middle at about 5, and I've got my treble at 7, with the output at about -7, -8. So along this Vox pedal that I found online, I'm using a blue backed Celestian speaker for my IR, so it's going to really give it that kind of tone that the Beatles would have had back in '63. So after I've done that, I've used the free EQ that comes with Reaper or Audacity or anything like that, which is really easy to use. I've started by doing a high pass filter at about 100 Hz, just to get rid of any of that noise, any of that really bassy tones, because Harrison's tone isn't very bassy. It's got a little bit of bass at the start of it, but not much later on. It's quite shimmery, quite shiny. We've got a little band EQ, which is -3 dB, about 250 Hz. This is just to take a bit more of that bass out, because again, we do want it to cut through the mix in these songs if you're looking to get these tones yourself. I've got another band at about 900 Hz plus 4 dB with like a medium spread, a medium bandwidth on that. That's just to kind of boost that mid, because the mids in this are a bit heavier. They're like the chunk of the solo and the sound, so we really need to try and get that mid kind of section dialed in. I've put a little plus 2 dB band at 2500 Hz. This is just to get some of the high mid frequencies boosted a little bit, so that again it cuts through the mix, and it also gives it that characteristic of Harrison's guitar tone. And then I've done one last band EQ at 7000 Hz plus 2 dB. That's just going to really help the high end, that little shimmer that is prevalent within Harrison's lead guitar tone. I've then used a compressor, so I've used a free compressor that comes with Reaper, which again is a free software for the most part. Again, these will come with programs like Audacity, programs you don't have to pay for. So I'm using the free comp that comes with that. So for this compressor, I've done a high attack, medium release, and I put the threshold down to about minus 16 dB. So it's just hitting it, but not quite, just because it's not too compressed, but it's still you can still hear that little bit of compression on his lead guitar tone. And again, this is going to boost it a little bit, help you be able to hear it cut through this mix, while also making sure that it kind of sits in the mix nicely. And finally, I've used a free reverb that comes with Reaper. Again, there's going to be free reverb that comes with Audacity. There's plenty of plugins that you can download for this reverb. I've just done a kind of like echo generator with a large width, with more dry than wet, and it basically works out quite well. It gives it that kind of like, it gives it that reverby sound without having to download these expensive plugins for like plates and spring reverbs. However, if you do have these plugins, it's perfect. You can use that sort of stuff, as the Beatles would have had chambers, special plates that they would have like used to get reverb. However, again, we're doing this on a budget, so I've just used reverb on Reaper, and yeah, the overall result sounds like this. Let's move on to McCartney's bass tone. It's very thumpy, it's very rounded, and that would be partially due to the guitar that he used, the bass guitar he used, as well as the strings that he used. When asked, Paul McCartney said that he used long, shiny ones, which you'd be like, well, what does that mean, Paul? But as you can see from photos, Paul McCartney used flat wound strings on his guitar, on his bass guitar, and the bass guitar that he used at the time in 1963, even earlier on, even later on until about 1963, and then again back during the Let It Be sessions and the Get Back sessions, was the Hofner 501 violin bass. And this bass's characteristics are very, very rounded, very warm, very thumpy, not too in your face. It sits really, really nicely in a mix, which is why I think McCartney liked it so much. But it was also one of the only guitars that he could get that was left-handed, as he's a left-handed bass player. But I'm going to show you how to get that bass tone using next to nothing, but we will be using a Hofner Ignition Series bass, which I have modified. You don't have to make these modifications, but if you want to get closer to that tone, then I do suggest that you maybe try and make some of those changes and see if it works for you. So I'm using pyramid flat wound strings on my Hofner violin bass, as well as I've installed a 0 fret, which is basically a fret before the first fret, right under the nut at the top of the guitar. This is because the German made ones have these and the Ignition basses do not have these. It helps with like stability and stuff like that. So it might not actually make that much of a huge difference to your sound, but I quite like how it feels. It makes playing it a little bit funner, but I'm going to show you how to get that thumping McCartney bass tone now. So in order to achieve McCartney's bass tone, I again used a Neuro amp modeler. However, this time I used a Fender Bassman Blackface 65 as the amp head, which again you can download free online. And then I used a Fender Bassman Neo mic'd with an SM57 as the IR pack, again free online. I have the bass at about 5, I have the middle at 6, and I have the treble at 6, with the output at 0, input at 0, with the threshold at about minus 60 dB. This gets you kind of close in the ballpark of what we're looking for. Then in the EQ, I've got again a high pass filter about 50 Hz. This is just to get rid of, again, some unwanted low tone, because as much as it is a bass tone, it leaves more space for other dynamics within the song, whether that's the drums, the guitar, the singing. It just makes the whole recording sound a lot cleaner. So we've got a high pass filter at 50 Hz there. We've got a band EQ plus 2 dB at 250 Hz. That's just to, again, boost the bass a little bit more around about those volumes that we're really hearing it. We're not wanting a lot of sub, we're just wanting the higher end of the bass spectrum. We've got a little cut of minus 2 dB at 450 Hz. That's another band EQ. That's just to scoop a little bit of that bass out, because actually quite a lot of McCartney's rounded kind of warm woody bass tone lives at around 900 Hz, which is where I put plus 4 dB. That really allows you to hear it within the mix while it still fits within the mix, same as the guitar. You kind of want everything to work in unison. And then I've got another small band EQ plus 1 dB at about 6k. That's just to give it that teeny little bit of high end, a little bit clarity. I've then put again the free compressor that comes with Reaper, and there'll be one that comes with Audacity. I've had again a high attack with a medium release. The threshold is at about minus 16, just so it just attacks it, just hits it down, but not too much. I've got the wet basically like almost mostly up, with the dry non-existent, and overall adding this, as well as how you're picking, making sure that you're using a pick when you're playing McCartney's bass lines, because he did quite often use a pick when doing these bass lines, as well as kind of playing close to the neck as opposed to playing close to the bridge, which is kind of like more of a Lennon Harrison kind of thing with their guitars. McCartney always played with a pick near the bridge, so make sure you do that to enhance your tone even more. So here's the finished result with all those EQs and compressors. The final technique we're going to be talking about is double tracking, which is something the Beatles were quite famous for. Now, double tracking is when you will take one vocal line and you will sing it again in order to double up the vocals. However, they will have a slight difference because no take will be the same. And this, instead of just duplicating the first take, which would just basically double the volume and not give it much dynamics or anything like that, by double tracking you're basically adding another person singing the same thing, but the person just happens to be you. So double tracking is very useful. You hear it a lot in the Beatles' early stuff as well as the later stuff. However, they would then go on to create something that does it automatically, but we will talk about that in a later episode. Just for now, we're going to be talking about double tracking, which I will show you how to do now. So when it comes to EQ and compression for the Beatles vocal sound, I've put a little high pass filter, maybe about 100 Hz, maybe a minus 2, minus 3 dB at about 300 Hz, plus 4 dB at about 2k, and about minus 1 dB at about 5k, with just basically a roll off at the top and the bottom. If again, you can use the free EQ for this, and then you're going to want to add some compression with a fast attack and a medium release. The Beatles did use a Fairchild, however you could realistically use any compressor. While they all do have different characteristics, we are doing this on a budget, and therefore if it happens to be the free one that you have to use, it will do the same job. It will still compress your vocals, which is signature to the Beatles sound, but all of this will help reduce muddiness, remove the boxiness. It gets rid of any sound with that high pass filter, that any low bass it'll get rid of. It'll push the mids, because the Beatles are kind of, there's not a large amount of high end, there's not a large amount of low end, it's all kind of there in the middle of the mix. And by having that little dip at around 4 or 5k, it's going to allow the vocals to still be present in the mix, but without being too aggressive when they don't need to be. A little bit of reverb on these vocals is going to take it a long way. It's going to end up making it sound a lot closer to the final result. Yeah, it's going to make it sound much closer to what you're trying to get. I give her all my love, that's all I do. And if you saw my love, you'd love her too. I give her all my love, that's all I do. And if you saw my love, you'd love her too. And I love her. Thank you so much for watching, and please make sure to tune in again soon for the next episode, where we will be talking about rubber sole, revolver, tape manipulation, and alternative double tracking techniques, as well as some instrument tones that you've just got to get into your life. I've been Rich Records, and this has been Beatles on a Budget.